Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Work, where we explore how to make work better through the power of relationships. My name is Jason Lauritsen. I'm the author of two books, a leadership trainer, and speaker on a mission to fix how we treat people at work. Now, in this episode, you'll hear about the power of asking for what you need as a means to building stronger relationships. Plus, we explore the many ways we sabotage our relationships with our assumptions about other people, and we talk about strategies for how to stop taking things so personally. My guest this week is Sarah Mann. Sarah is an experienced leadership and executive coach with a style described as creative, insightful, and a straight shooter. She is sought out by high-performing, driven, and savvy leaders who want to elevate their impact. Now, I've had the privilege of being coached by Sarah, and she's helped me grow in a bunch of ways. I can attest to her effectiveness. She is really good at what she does, as you will discover in this episode. So please enjoy my conversation with Sarah Mann. Sarah, my friend, thank you for joining me to have this conversation.
Thank you for asking me. I'm excited.
So before we get into the heavy lifting here of what I asked you to join me for today, talking about your relationships and mining for insights and lessons, I want to start by asking you a few questions to kind of get to know you or allow people to get to know a little bit about you and how you think about relationships. And so I'll start with an easy one. I'm going to start with a softball for you, which
Thank
is what quality do you most value in a close friend?
Well, I think there's a lot of qualities. If I had to boil it down, I'm going to give you two because I don't think I can pick just one. One is trust, hugely, hugely important to me on a number of levels. And the other is laughter and humor. So so maybe that's three, but I put laughter and humor together. So I'm counting those as one.
That knowing you, that makes sense to me. I'm curious, as you over the years have, as you've had friendships develop and form, like I'm curious, like with those two things, especially around the humor piece, like how does that show up, or how early does that have to show up? Is that kind of a leading thing? I mean, obviously trust you don't know early on, but is it kind of like, if I'm going to be friends with you, you probably make me laugh in the first 5 minutes, or I'm just curious what that looks like for you.
That's a really good question. I don't think that that is necessarily conscious on my part. A tangible example I could give you, I think, is so, I mean, you've known me for a while. So I have, like many of us, evolved over the years, but historically pretty serious. And I ended up marrying someone who is one of the funniest people I know. And so I knew early on in that relationship that I was in a good place because he just made, we laugh every day. I mean, I could be steaming mad about something and he still can make me laugh, which is really annoying, by the way, because sometimes you just want to be steaming mad. But so I don't know that it's conscious that I go looking for it per se, except that perhaps on some level I acknowledge it and I see it when it's in front of me. And it feels good to laugh and it feels good to be around people that share a similar form of humor.
Mm. It is like laughter taps that sort of, I think, that playful part of our soul that wants to come out and play, but we just live in such a serious world, it seems like, that when that happens, it feels so liberating. So that makes sense to me a lot. Well, let's peel back. I want to ask you one of my favorites, one of my new favorite questions about relationships, which is this. What is something that you learned or observed as you were growing up as a child that you think has stayed with you and shapes how you think about or approach relationships still today?
Two must be the theme for today. Two things come to mind.
Twofers.
Two first. So one is I'm very grateful and I feel really blessed in many ways. I have always had a lot of friends. I have a huge community. And so one awareness or lesson, if you will, is the importance of that. because left to my own devices, I'm very introverted. I like to be alone. So it's easy sometimes to isolate intentionally or unintentionally. And so I'm grateful to have a community of people that I don't have to isolate, and that I can tap into when, life throws curveballs. That's just part of life. And so to be able to have resources to support me during those times, I think is huge. And to not, I mean, people have heard this, I'm sure, many times at this point, but the Surgeon General has determined that we have a loneliness epidemic. And so I'm grateful to just have people, so I don't have to be lonely unless it's a choice to be lonely for me at this point, I think. And I grew up very lonely, I guess, was the point that I was trying to make. So I really grew up very lonely, and I realized that I have a community and I have to tap into that community. And also will add to that, I think, I grew up lonely, and that carried into my career. So for a very large part of my career, I felt isolated and alone and lonely. And when I reflect back on it, what I recognize is that I either didn't have a network or I didn't tap into the network that I had. And so from that place, it's very easy to feel separate from and apart from other people, instead of a part of something bigger. And I think the second piece is that no one person can be all things. So I feel like probably this is true for all of us, but I'll speak for myself. I tap into different people for different things, and it's not fair to other people for one person to be the sole go-to for all types of support and all types of whatever. So, and I think both of those realizations were born out of how I grew up.
That's a really, I mean, I think the second one in particular, that second observation, I think is a really powerful one, and it's a challenging one, I think, to sort of really fully embrace and understand. I think especially I think that's where a lot of, I mean, we're not in a marriage therapy show, but I mean, I think that's where a lot of marriages get stuck or come apart is the expectations. It's like you think this person is supposed to be all things. And so when it turns out that they aren't one of those things, instead of trying to figure out how to fill that with a different kind of relationship or in a way that's constructive and healthy to your overall relationship, instead it leads to resentments, or instead it leads to, I'm going to try to change you to be something that you're not naturally to be. And I think that happens all over the place, right? With friends and all kinds of things. So that is a really interesting one that resonates deeply for me.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
mean, there's plenty of things. I mean, there's plenty of things that I don't know. Maybe my husband isn't interested in, or maybe he's for whatever reason not the best person to talk to. That's why I have girlfriends, and just the nature of conversations are fundamentally going to be different, and different situations call. It's like in any work situation, different situations call for different tools and different
Yeah.
skills, and so I think about it in that way also.
Well, and those two I mean, both those things you just shared really are intertwined, right? That in order for that to work, you also have to have that community of different kinds of people and different kinds of relationships to sort of fill all those needs that we have
Yeah.
as humans. So,
But I want to add one thing, because I don't necessarily, personally, I don't necessarily feel that means that people have to have hundreds and hundreds of friends. And there are a lot of people that have very small circles. And I think that works too. I think for me, I got to a place where I realized that like being fully self-reliant wasn't healthy and didn't yield the best results personally or professionally, because then I found myself in an echo chamber with me giving me advice, and and that just led to places of isolation. So, but for anybody who's listening to this who may have a smaller circle, that's great. I don't know, nothing wrong with that. For me, it's have a circle, even if it's two
yeah,
people, one
yeah.
person.
Well, and I think underlying that too is just understand, it's not so much about the numbers as much as it is, at least what I heard you say, I think, is understand your needs.
Mm.
Understand, though, sort of the thing that maybe for you to feel connected, to feel not isolated. I mean, I think about that in my own sphere of I have friends. I mean, I would say that I have lots of friends, but not all of those friends are of the same, they're not all the same. Like some friends are friends I've known for 25 or 30 years, and we have deep history, and the kinds of relationship I have there, that's different than I have work friends. I have friends that love to talk about deep stuff, which I love to get into a deep conversation about stuff. You know this about me. That's why we're doing this, why I do this podcast. But like my wife, not as interested in that. Like she can do that once in a while, but she would literally run me out of the house if I was trying to do that with her all the time. And so you have to, there's different friends that fill different needs, and we connect, but maybe we connect on that, but we're not necessarily overlapping on lots of things. So I think it's okay to have lots of different kinds of relationships. And to your point, it's not about the numbers. It's about like, do you feel like you have the support you need? Do you
Right.
feel like you have the relationships you need? So,
Right. And I think,
all right.
especially, top that off with one more point. This feels heightened, I think, since COVID, maybe not. But if I look at my community, the number of people, and so I would include you in this, the number of people that I met professionally who over time have become true friends, the lines really have started to blur for me a lot over the years. And so, yeah, I'll just leave
Well,
it at that.
regardless of I mean, I do think that I do think there are some trends that sort of are accelerating that, right? Where part of it is we don't have as many places to meet people. So oftentimes we meet people through work because that's the one place we kind of do interact with people, new people, different people. And that's where friendships,
Yeah.
you have to have the seeds planted somewhere. And I do think, the COVID experience or the pandemic experience certainly broke down some walls between work and personal for a lot of people. So I think that's a good thing, right? I personally, I think that's a good thing, right? Better relationships, better work. That's what we're here, here to talk about. So let's dive into it. So I asked you to think about a couple of relationships so that we could talk a little bit about those and maybe learn about those. And so we're going to start with a personal relationship. And so I asked you to think about a personal relationship in your life that's strong and healthy and positive that we could chat about. So who are we going to talk about today?
I have a girlfriend who is near and dear to me, and it just is a very easy relationship.
All right. So tell me a little bit about the relationship. Is this someone you've known a long time? Like give us a little bit of background on this relationship.
So we've known each other for about 7 years, which doesn't, when I think about the actual time span, doesn't feel like that long compared to how I feel when I'm with her, which feels like we've really been connected since birth or something. So there are very deep bonds there. And when we first met, there were some unique circumstances that bonded us. And so I think that has really helped accelerate the relationship and also accelerated the trust that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation as well.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about, when you think about this relationship, what is it about the relationship that you value most, or, what kind of impact does it have for you?
Well, first of all, she's just a beautiful human being. So let's just start there. So in terms of who she is, she possesses all kinds of qualities that I find attractive in others, aside from the trust. And she has a wonderful sense of humor, and she's very smart, and she's very supportive, and she's generous, and she's kind, and she's many, many things. There are aspects of our personality that are pretty similar. And what I learned pretty quickly was, which I think is huge, for me, it's huge. I feel understood. So we have a level of understanding of each other because we have some of these similarities. So as an example, I am highly introverted. And that is often misunderstood by people because they think if I'm quiet, that maybe I'm upset or I'm mad or whatever. And she is the same. And so we can actually spend extended periods of time together. And while we do talk a lot, we don't need to talk a lot. And there are times where we don't. We just are companionably together. And I'm not stressed about, oh, how come she's not talking and what's wrong? And she's not stressed about, well, how come Sarah's not saying anything? And that's a beautiful thing. So the other piece that I've recently come to appreciate more, because there have been a few instances that it's been highlighted for me. She does not try to fix, offer advice, make things better. If I come to her with a problem, she's a wonderful listener. She'll offer a perspective. She does not try to tell me what to do. She does not, well, have you tried this? And what about this? And well, what if you said this to them? And so I feel very cared for in that regard. Just understood, listened to, and supported without trying to fix the situation for me.
This is what my wife tells me all the time is the key to being a good husband is being able to do what you just described. So this is a journey I've been on. I don't think I'm always the best at it, but so when you think about your relationship and it developing over the last 7 years, what do you think are there, I mean, like you've just described a few things here, but are there some things that the two of you do together or that sort of have become a way that you have fostered or built this relationship over time that you think is or maybe has sort of that you've learned from maybe and has become kind of an insight or a lesson for how you might show up in another relationship, or if you were fostering another friendship with someone new? Is there some things that we could learn from in terms of how the two of you approach this friendship or how you foster it? It might be interesting to talk about.
That's the first thing that popped into my head was lobster rolls. Yeah, I don't, we met in a work context. We do the same thing for work. She also has her own business coaching executives. And so we have originally, I think that was what originally helped was a coming together piece. Over time, we both love to take walks in the woods and we both love to sit and eat lobster rolls and sit by the ocean and things like that. I would probably need to think more deeply about something more deep than that.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you ensure that, and maybe you don't have to, but like, how do you ensure that the relationship stays or continues to stay healthy and that you continue to stay connected? Sometimes that's very easy. Sometimes that requires great intention. I'm just curious if there's anything there that you do that might be interesting.
I think that goes back to the first question that you asked me, which is that it feels very easy because I don't think that either of us has to spend a lot of time thinking about how to maintain the friendship because of the shared understanding and because of the trust and because of the openness. And so one example, she made a request last week, said, I just need to take a break from talking about X. I said, you got it. We won't talk about X. And if I forget, remind me, because X is something that we talk a bit about. And it wasn't, she just did it in a very conversational, matter-of-fact way and stated a need. And I said, okay. And so then we went about. And so it just feels easy.
Well, and I think I think what you just shared made it sound like this is a very easy thing to do, but I think it's a pretty profound thing to do that a lot of people struggle with, which is being able to ask for exactly what you need, and trust that the person on the other end of that request will be there to honor that without judging it or without. And so I think that's a pretty important thing and a pretty profound thing that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that regard, maybe I take it a little bit for granted because it does feel so easy. And I'm also, I know you'll at some point tie this back to work. But I immediately go to, not but, and I also immediately go to, I think that that's one of the challenges sometimes in organizations is that whatever the nature of the relationship is, people don't always feel that comfort level to state a need, even if the need is pretty basic. And that I think can create a lot of internal strife for people. I think it can create a lot of opportunity for miscommunication, misunderstandings, and things like that for sure.
All right.
So
So
sorry if I'm jumping ahead.
no, that's all right. That's totally, there's very few rules here. So let's add on the conversation about the second person I asked you to think about. Is I asked you to think about kind of a work relationship directly, a relationship sort of born out of work or through work that has been positive and healthy for you. And I'm curious, who are we going to talk about there?
I have another friend I met 2008, 2009, something like that. And it's been an interesting relationship because over the span of however many years that's been, we have played multiple work roles. I have been her client. She's been, what's the word? Like one of my affiliates for a piece of work. We've been friends. We've worked together on projects. I mean, she's coached me. I've coached her. So we just have been in numerous roles together over the span of, I can't do the math, a lot of years, 15 years, something like that.
So as you think about this relationship, what is it about this particular relationship that has had the biggest impact for you over that, 15 years, we'll call it?
The risk of sounding like a broken record, trust,
Mm-hmm.
humor. Again, I would say that occasionally I have what some people might consider to be a warped sense of humor, and she shares that. So we find a lot of humor in the mundane and whatnot. And really, so I've heard this definition of being humble means that I'm teachable. And so what I love about both of these friends and many friends is that I just learn so much from them. And I learn when I pause to listen to what's being shared, and things like that. So there's been so much over the years that has been shared learning or support or a lot of laughter. Yeah. So as you're asking me these questions, I'm feeling like, ooh, my answers are pretty similar, but I think that it just speaks to a trend line.
Yeah, and what's important to you, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so if you reflect on, I mean, it sounds like the two of you, it's really interesting that the two of you have been through all of these different roles, where you've switched places and you've played different roles for each other, sometimes where there was a value exchange, all kinds of different value exchange, some business, some just personal or friendship related, whatever. As you reflected on this relationship, what do you think you've learned about relationships from this one and how you've made that work over the years through all of those different transitions that you've been able to maybe take as a lesson or take as a skill to apply to other relationships, whether that be personal or work?
So I'm an avid texter, although I seem to be slipping a little bit, but as the years progress, but I am an avid texter. And she sometimes isn't. And I think early in the relationship, I ascribed meaning to that as a small example. And so the lesson, and same as you send somebody an email, you don't hear back or whatever it might be. And, it's not about me. People are busy. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the world. And I, I, I hear this so frequently from clients, and I see it in my own life where it is just, as humans, I think it is so easy to make an assumption about an action that someone took or didn't take, or something that was said or not said, and take it personally. And probably 99.8% of the time, it's not personal. It's just that person showing up in the world as who they are. Sometimes she texts me right back, sometimes she doesn't. And I don't think twice about it anymore.
That's right. That's how there's so much drama we create for ourselves. This webcast is sponsored by my longtime friends at Inspiring Workplaces. Now, if you are someone who's working to create an engaging and inspiring workplace for your employees, and of course you are, that's why you're here, then listen up. Inspiring Workplaces is a global community of tens of thousands of HR and employee experience professionals that you can join for free. As a member, you will gain access to thousands of articles and videos and podcasts and events that will help you change the world by changing the world of work. They are also home to the Inspiring Workplaces Awards that recognize the best workplaces in the world. You can learn about the application process at their website. So please go visit inspiring-workplaces.com to learn more and to join the community. That's inspiring-workplaces.com. So, all right. So I am excited to dive to this next piece where I want to pull on a couple strings that you have we've left dangling as we've talked, especially because as a coach, I know you are generally on the other side of these issues. I'm sure are issues that you see all the time, and that you're helping people think about how to navigate these at work. And so I want to talk about like how we can take a couple of these insights and what they look like at work practically if we wanted to use them to build or foster better relationships at work or with work. And so let's go back to actually, let's start with this. Let's stay right with where we were. This understanding or trying to embrace that it's not about us. Right? That it's not personal, and we tend to take things so personally. And so I am curious, when you encounter, which I'm sure you do in your coaching clients frequently, this thing pops up, right? Where we're obsessing about some other person or some other group of people and what they're doing and what they think that means for them. Like, how do you help someone move through that? What kind of strategies, what kind of approaches do you offer to help someone kind of get grounded in that it's not about you? And what does that look like to sort of move past that?
So coaching's a pretty individualized approach. So it's going to look a little different for everybody. That being said, there are I'd say probably two things that come up pretty frequently with clients. One of them is an acronym that I learned many years ago that I love, which I offer to people. Take what you like, leave the rest, which is Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. And it's an easy way to remember that it's not all about me. And people have a lot going on. And I guess related to that, Jason, too, is that iceberg metaphor analogy.
Yep.
And that we go to work and we only see what's above the waterline. And so we see someone who's put together and articulate and whatever it is that we see. But underneath the waterline, we all have lives. And you just don't know what someone else is dealing with in terms of, and life throws curveballs. Everybody's got baggage. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I just think that's part of the human experience. Everyone's got baggage, whether it's child care issues, elder care issues, disease, addiction, mental illness. Like there's just stuff out in the world. And most people don't share that freely in the workplace. So you don't know what stressors somebody else has going on in their life. That's the first thing. And the second thing was is this idea that there are a lot of things in the world we don't have control over. The one thing that we absolutely have control over is how we show up in the world. And so this idea of the place that you lead from is going to determine your results. So if you haven't responded to my emails and in a week, and so I have built up a story in my head about you, and then you and I get into a meeting together, and I come into that meeting like all fired up because I've got a story going about you now. How you respond to me is likely going to be very different than if I show up and say, hey, I didn't hear back from you. Unlike you, is everything okay? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Your response is going to be fundamentally different. And both of those responses, whether I'm fired up and ready to go, or I'm more concerned about you and checking in on you and supportive, that's the place that I'm leading from.
Mm.
And sometimes clients will say, well, I don't have any control over that. I'm ticked and I don't have any control over that. And this may sound harsh. You do have control over it. Because if you don't have control over your emotional world, no one else does. So there's a level of accountability and personal responsibility and emotional maturity and leadership maturity that we all have an opportunity to develop over the course of our lives. And that fundamentally changes the relationships that we have with people, whether that's personal or work.
Certainly does. And I would say the thing I would add on to that just what you just described is something that I have been really interested in and been working on personally for myself, is this whole notion of this, really being aware of the stories that we tell ourselves about what's happening.
Mhm.
And a couple of things that I have found to be really helpful over the years too, just tactically, is that when something happens and I don't know, I'm not sure what it means, right? So someone doesn't reply to my text as fast as I thought they were going to. And I'm like, uh-oh. And so like, I don't know. So I tend to go to where, right, we write a worst case story is usually what we do, because that's what our brains are sort of hardwired to do.
Yep.
And what I have found, one of the things is if I can interrupt that for a second, and the example I always use, and it literally transformed how I drive, is, when you're out in traffic and somebody cuts you off or does something, and there's the immediate, for me, it's like, okay, this person is an a-hole. Like they just intentionally, like that's where we go. And I don't know when it happened. It's been 15, 20 years ago, but I heard somebody talk about this somewhere, and I just interrupt it with like, now I write an alternate story, or I choose like, okay, what else could be going on? Well, maybe they're in a hurry because they got a call from their kids panicked about something, or their kids at school got hurt, or maybe somebody's in the hospital, or somebody, whatever. I can write a lot of different stories. And as soon as I provide an alternate narrative, it diffuses like the emotional bomb. And so that's one tactic I have found to be really helpful. And then the other thing I have told people too, relative to this, is like, if you're not sure, just ask.
Mhm.
Like you just said, just ask. Like, not sure how to take that email. I don't know if you're in a hurry, or if so I figured I'd just ask, like, can we just check in on that? And it's amazing how often it's like, yeah, sorry, I was just in a hurry. I should have said blah. And then it's like, okay, done. And it's gone. And so that happens so frequently. So anyway, those are two other tactics kind of building on what you just shared that I have found to be personally very helpful.
Yeah. And I think so two thoughts. One is that's why when organizations go through change and there's change management initiatives, the communication becomes so important, because in the absence of information, people will make up their own story, because
Right.
to your point, that is how we're wired unless we work to change that wiring. And I forgot what the second thing was.
It's all right. Well, so let's go to this other thread that I wanted to pull on a little bit, and that is, you had suggested earlier that one of the challenges we have at work is that we have a really tough time asking for what we need. People just don't. Instead, we guess what people need, or we guess what we think somebody wants from us. And there's all this guessing that goes on, all these assumptions that create problems. And so I'm curious if there are some strategies, or how do you coach someone to think about that, like to get more comfortable in asking for what they need from others? Like, just because I know that this is something probably everybody struggles with. So I'm curious if you have any insights for us.
So what's coming to mind is an example from a conversation with a friend yesterday, which is friend, not work. And I think it's really the same scenario. And it ties exactly back to what you just said about reframing the narrative and okay, if I were to look at this from a different perspective, what would change? Friend, been on a few dates with someone she really likes, hasn't heard from the person in 4 days and is upset. Well, did you reach out to that person? No, I want them to reach out to me. Okay, well, you have just put yourself in a box. Like, there's nobody wins in that. So we're talking, and I said, I don't know, maybe just reach out and say, hey, I've been thinking about you. I'd love to get together again. And they did. And the person texted back and said, that's great, I'd love to. But there was a whole narrative that she was stuck in, that she didn't want to come, whatever. So, and that happens in the workplace too. Clients think that the ask or the comment is a much bigger deal than it is, when at the end of the day, you're just talking to another human. I mean, it's like, it's a relationship. Just ask the question. Doesn't have to be argumentative, doesn't have to be conflict, doesn't have to be provocative. Have you asked?
That's exactly right. And I think the other thing that is so interesting is that we because of those expectations we project, or the assumptions we make, we forget that oftentimes the person on the other side of that is likely, like, they want to know what it is that you want. Like, they're curious about that, especially if it's in a work context. I think it's funny to me how many employees don't want to ask for what they need from their manager. And yet the manager's job, very literally, is to think about getting you what you need to do your job more effectively. And I think about that in any relationship. I mean, I say that to Angie all the time. I'm like, just tell me. Like, it's fine. I'm like, I am, like, one of my motivators in life is to make sure you are happy and taken care of, and that you have what you need. Like, that's one of the things that I am motivated to do. And when you tell me what you need, it allows me to succeed at that. You get what you need. I'm happy and fulfilled. It closes it's a win-win all the way around. And I think I know as a leader,
Nice.
it's a gift. Well, and at work, as a spouse, anybody, it is a gift when someone just shares with you what it is they need, because most of the time we want to give it to them. We're trying to puzzle out what it is they need. And so I think it's also, if you reframe it that way, you're making the job of the people around you easier by creating clarity or transparency about your needs to be able to achieve the things that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think the reverse is true as well. So it's not it's not only the employee managing up, if you will, and stating their needs to the manager. I have had many clients who are afraid to have an honest conversation with a direct report. And sometimes it's because they don't feel like they've got the language. Sometimes they're unclear about what's okay to say. Some folks have been drilled with ideas about don't do these 72 things because you'll open us up to a lawsuit. So there's a whole number of reasons why, or performance appraisals, right? You've done a lot of work in that space, and managers are afraid to give performance appraisals because, oh my gosh, what happens if Jason doesn't agree with what I've said? Well, that's okay. Jason's allowed to disagree. Jason's allowed to have his feelings, and that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation about it in a respectful and so yeah, I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, clarity is rocket fuel in relationships, and that leads to all kinds of positive outcomes, and clarity is usually what is breaking down. So, Sarah, this has been delightful.
Can I say
And
one
if
piece
you,
on the
yeah,
clarity?
go about it. Go for it.
So if I think about that friend I was talking about
Mhm.
a moment ago, one of the things that she had said she was looking for in a relationship was consistency. And this other person said, "Yep, great." So she said to me, I was clear about that. I said, "Well, I don't know. What's consistency? Look, what does that mean for you? Because you could be coming, and that happens in coaching all the time too. Well, what does success look like for you? Or what does delegating mean for you? Or what does managing up look like for you? What's executive presence look like for you? What's being strategic look like for you?" So I think a lot of things get lost in translation that way, where we throw words out and there's an assumed shared understanding without a lot of clarification about what we mean by that thing.
Amen. Amen. Awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this. This was delightful, as I knew it would be. Lots of good stuff in here. Appreciate you making time to have the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. More importantly, I hope you learned something from the episode that can help you right away. Now, if you'd like to reflect on what you can learn from your own healthy, positive relationships to make work better, I've included a link in the description below where you can access and download what I call the relationship reflection exercise. This includes the same questions that I ask each of my guests to reflect on prior to our conversation on the webcast. Also, if you found today's episode valuable, I'd ask 3 quick favors of you. Number 1, please like the episode. By liking the video and adding a comment if something spoke to you or stood out to you as really significant, you give me some great and valuable feedback, but you also help others find the video. I'd also ask you to subscribe to the channel. That does 2 important things. One, it makes sure that you won't miss any upcoming episodes, and it sends me the message that you like the kind of content that I'm creating here. And finally, please share this video with someone who you think might benefit. What better gift can you give someone than the gift of better relationships and a better work experience? I'm really grateful that you were here today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.